just kind of tumbling, it felt like it was in slow-mo because you're not sure if this is it. I mean, in that moment, you're just not sure. And then, like, when we finally stopped and I knew that I was no longer being kind of thrown around and I tasted dirt. I mean, I never tasted so lovely in my life. I mean, just to know that you're fine. And that was the time that, you start looking around, seeing if other people need help.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, one of the survivors of the Amtrak crash joining us now is Stephen Moore, Chief Economist at the Heritage Foundation. Stephen, welcome. Before we get to Barack Obama and some of the things he said yesterday, you, along with many, many others, are a frequent rider of that route on Amtrak from Washington, D.C. to New York.
Yeah, I am, Steve. I take the Acela train about once a week up to New York from Washington and back. And, maybe I'll never complain again about it being so slow and never being on time. But, look, I think that what a tragedy this is. The one thing that I predicted that has already happened, Steve, only, less than 12 hours after the crash, is that all of the liberals and all of the unions and all of the railroad passenger groups are saying, this is because we haven't spent enough money. And so I looked, just before our show, I looked at how much money we put into Amtrak as taxpayers over the last 10 years. Steve, it's almost $5 billion of subsidies to this railroad. In fact, I go back to the 1980s, the early 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was trying to wean Amtrak off of these taxpayer subsidies. And by the way, this is not the first accident at Amtrak. Amtrak has actually had multiple accidents like this, and I think it's because the government runs the railroad.
Yeah, well, I tell you, we know that private sector does a much better job at running things than the government does, right on down the line for the most part.
Steve, let me give you one statistic.
Yeah.
This is going to shock people, but flying is actually safer than taking the train.
Yep.
I mean, that's amazing, but it is true. I mean, on a per mile basis, you're much safer being on an airplane than being on an Amtrak train. I mean, there have been multiple accidents, and I think this is, look, we don't know what happened on this accident, but we do know from some of the previous ones that there were errors. There were errors by the conductors and so on, not a lack of infrastructure or spending.
Right. Well, we're hearing today from the Wall Street Journal, which is yet to be confirmed by authorities, that the train was going 100 miles an hour around that turn where the limit was supposed to be 50. So if that's the case,
And that's exactly, Steve, that's exactly what happened in one of the previous accidents, that the conductor was just taking the train way too fast on the track.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, I want you to hear and we wish, of course, our sympathies go out to those who lost loved ones and those who are injured. Our prayers are with the families and the victims, certainly. But let's listen to what Barack Obama had to say yesterday. I believe this was at Georgetown University. Give a listen.
Sadly, I think there's been an effort to either make folks mad at folks at the top or to be mad at folks at the bottom. And I think the effort to suggest that the poor are sponges, leeches, don't want to work, are lazy, are undeserving, got traction. And look, it's still being
being put forward and promoted. And he went on, Stephen, to blame Fox News and said that we need to change the way poverty is reported on by the media, which was an astounding comment. Give me your take on all that.
I am angry, and I'm not angry at poor people. I'm not angry at rich people. I'm angry at our government, quite frankly. And, we have spent well over $1 trillion, closer to $2 trillion since Lyndon Johnson declared war on poverty in 1965 and created the Great Society and one program after another, model cities, food stamps, on and on, public housing subsidies. And yet, what have we bought for it, Steve? I mean, if you look at the inner cities today where minority populations live and poor people live, I mean, it is a disgrace that this is happening in America. And it's not because, Mr. President, we're not spending enough money. It's because when you pay people to not work, you get less work. When you pay people, young girls, to have children out of wedlock, guess what? You're going to have a lot of fatherless homes. That's the tragedy of the welfare state, is that we've spent so much money and we've gotten nothing for it. The president said we've made all this progress in reducing poverty. I'm not so sure he's right about that. I feel like we've really regressed in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, and of course, you know, let's look at Baltimore. Education. I think next to Newark, which is a colossal failure, the students of Baltimore get more money per capita per student than anywhere else in the country.
And by the way, Steve, you're right about that. And the president said in his speech, of course, his speech was a pitch for more money, right? And he said, you know, what do we expect that we have all these people in poverty when we're not spending enough money on our schools?
It's insane.
I'm thinking, my gosh. I mean, Washington, D.C., which has some of the worst public schools in the country, spends $18,000 to $20,000 a year. Baltimore is spending about the same amount. My hometown of Chicago is spending nearly $20,000 per student. My goodness, don't people think if we had more choice, more private sector options in inner city schools, that we could educate better these kids for probably half the price? I mean, my goodness, the Catholic schools do that right now, Steve.
Well, this is what every Republican candidate needs to do. Go into these neighborhoods, go into the church. Well, you can't go into the churches. If you can go, I don't know, you know, for political reasons.
Into those churches.
And say, hey, how would you like a voucher for $10,000? And with that voucher, you could send your kids to any one of 5 to 10 schools. You pick. How would you like that? Oh, and oh boy, the floodgates will open.
Well, you know, a lot of the black pastors in this country have come out very much in favor of that,
Absolutely.
Steve. And you're right. Republicans have to take their message to black neighborhoods, to black schools, to black churches, and to into the barrios, areas where Hispanics live, and make exactly that point. They should say, as Bruce Rauner did, who won the governorship in Illinois, by going into inner city Chicago and saying to those communities of people, what have the Democrats done for you? They've made you dependent on government.
Absolutely. Stephen, always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Stephen Moore, ladies and gentlemen. We're coming back with Joseph Concannon. Don't go away.